Welcome back, everyone. We'll be starting the session again shortly, and also thank you for the 330 of you that are still with us. Let's get my camera back in place. I hope you had a good break, and I hope you found something good to sustain you for the next part of the session, and two really interesting elements to come. Just before we begin, I thought I'd reflect a little bit about this danger when we get youngsters back in school of wanting to test to find where they are, and sort of this brings sort of concerns to us. But Ruth talked quite a lot about formative assessment, and one of the things I think that GL, our partner GL, have often shared with us is that formative assessment is something you can use the standardized tools for. GL's assessments, particularly things like the CATS test and the like, have always been used for predicting GCSE results. And then if you joined us in our previous session, you realize that they're on a far higher reliability than SATs and other things, and they only take youngsters about half an hour to do. And these days they can be done online too, and can be a very simple and not a high stakes things for students at all. Dan Sims from GL is with us. Do you just want to share anything about the sorts of different uses you can make of some of the assessments in the new environments, Dan?
Absolutely, thanks, David. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. I think there's been some brilliant ideas, especially around the sort of positivity and the focus on high quality teaching and learning. And I think, you know, certainly good quality standardized assessments should provide just an additional insight to support that teaching and learning. And I think that the key with digital assessment is just being able to get your hands on that data quickly, so actually it can get to staff and it can impact teaching and learning as quickly as possible at the start of term. I'm really pleased to see that focus on the pastoral need and well-being, and I think that's absolutely the key priority for schools when they go back. And I think trying to uncover any hidden barriers is perhaps a really nice, easy way to try and find out where students are and who's been impacted by the lockdown, for better or for worse than others. Certainly something I've seen as a governor in my local school as well. So I think standardized assessment as a formative assessment can provide those extra insights. It's certainly not about testing. It's certainly about just using the right assessing what you want to measure, and trying to sort of really identify kind of what could really help you in terms of curriculum planning, in terms of kind of getting your students back into school as quickly as possible in autumn. That's the priority for us. And you know, already we had some great thoughts from schools we're working with on how they're going to do that using the data already.
I mean, one other thing, Dan, is just to say that the move away from using your assessments in a paper-based form to using them online means they're more responsive to the individual student. Do you just want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you take something like our new group reading assessment, which is an adaptive digital assessment, what it allows is that actually it gives a sort of more personalized route through for the learner. So actually you don't feel pressurized, you don't feel like you're competing with anyone. Actually you're working at your level, at your pace, with your peers, importantly as well. So I think just trying to break down some of the barriers around assessment for children, so actually that they do feel relaxed, and actually you can get the best and actually understand kind of, you know, where their strengths are and actually where you can support. So I think the beauty with digital assessment is where you can be adaptive, but also I think that the speed in which you can get the results and the data, I think that's the key, because actually being able to impact teaching and learning is at the heart of all of this, and you need to be able to get to the data and be able to share it with staff that can make the difference.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thanks for that. And it leads us nicely into the IT stuff. There's some lovely case studies within Whole Ed and Alex, and Lisa, perhaps we can put them out in the summary of the set, of people who've used these sorts of standardized assessments formatively to help target efforts, and also to really help know students better and know the students we haven't noticed better. To me, this is all about being data informed rather than driven. As a country, we've been too data driven and often not data informed, and not using some of the data we have widely enough. So if things like the CATS tests are locked away and just used to predict GCSEs, liberate them and use them to inform teaching and learning would be my advice. We move now into the third session of the day, which is basically focusing on the virtual environment and challenging paradigms beyond the lockdown. In what seems like an earlier age, in my case it probably was, I used to reflect that schools were the last factories. And I remember as a boy standing outside a factory in Liverpool holding my grandfather's hand and waiting for my my dad to come out of that factory and hearing the hooter go and watching the lines and lines of people coming out the factory and getting onto buses. And one of the things I reflected on is that schools are the last place where that happens at the end of the day. And most working environments are now very different. And throughout my career, I've been a little bit disappointed that whilst IT has changed so many aspects of life and work, it's had relatively little impact on learning in schools, often being used simply as an audiovisual aid, the tyranny of the whiteboard. And it's really reduced workload, and it's really freed teachers to do more of what they do best. And it's been fascinating to watch two things actually during the lockdown. Some of the best schools, and I think the schools who are sharing with us are some of the best schools, doing really interesting things, but others almost resisting in the way you used to stand a person in front of an early motor car with a flag saying it could only go at 2 miles an hour. Not almost resisting talking to children because of safeguarding reasons when good policies could easily be put in place, and recognizing we've now got a medium that can be very communicative, can have greater proximity in some ways than in a classroom. And that's why I'm delighted in this session to have a number of colleagues sharing with us about how they've seen some of the opportunities of using the virtual world in the lockdown world, and how I think, as we've seen, intend to continue for that to be part of an appealing and attractive new normal rather than something they had to do in extreme circumstances. Delighted to bring back Shonogh for the second time this morning, who has done a great deal to build on their prior work, which he freely admitted they hadn't perhaps used enough before. And what impresses me most about Shonogh's work is how at the heart of it, it's always been about people and relationships, not the technology. So welcome back, Shonogh, again. And I'm still smiling, Shonogh, about your dining room. And I don't dare say what I said before we started this morning, but I've got this image in my mind that I can't get away. And I'm not going to say it unless you give me permission to, but welcome back.
You can say it, it's fine. It's quite hilarious, I think.
Well, I thought it's like a film set for the Addams family. Then Shonogh admitted to me it's Addams is her middle name. Sorry. So Shonogh, it's a lovely.
It was my maiden name. I was called Addams before, so maybe actually this is part of the Addams family. I don't know.
But Shonogh, I do exactly what you'd say. That's why I had to ask permission watching that environment. No, it's a brilliant pleasure to welcome you back, Shonogh, and I think that the work you've been doing is absolutely amazing. So Shonogh.
Okay, so I would like to start off by saying that I don't love technology. It makes me really quite amused that I keep getting rolled out to talk about technology when actually technology for me is not a great thing. I'm not particularly technologically literate. For me, technology has entirely been about the fact that I love our kids. I really love them. I really want them to be able to be supported in whatever way is necessary to be able to become really good at being themselves. Ansford's a really kooky school. If you came there, you would find it the most unlikely place to be at the forefront of using technology. You know, we've got goats walking around. It's ridiculous, really, the dichotomy there. But for me, it's all about them. It's all about the kids. It's all about them having the opportunity in whatever way necessary to have an independent approach to their learning so that when they leave us, they're not just another homogenous blob of educated child. They're still themselves, and they've been supported in whatever way necessary and challenged to become the best version of them and ready to take their place in society and to, really get hold of that society and shake it by its, shoulders and make it into a better place for everyone. The whole of what we've been trying to do at Ansford for the past 4 years is about working on what we called our Ansford graduate model. So what do we want our kids to be like by the time they leave us? And for me, GCSE qualified is not a good enough thing to be. That's the kind of incidental part of the journey for me. And I need to make that clear right from the start, because what I'm about to say is not about being successful at GCSE, although I accept that we do have to tolerate that at the moment. I'd be really happy if we didn't have to tolerate that, if we had a more appropriate model for judging whether someone is successful in our society, but right at the minute, that's not the case. So our Ansford graduate, the central tenet of it was that we wanted them to be independent. We wanted them to be able to realise that their life was what they made it, and that they needed to mobilise everyone around them and everything around them to help them achieve the best for themselves. That is the thing that's enabled us to go into lockdown and be successful, not their technological literacy. So the fact that they're now at home in their own house, knowing that their life is what they make it and that their learning matters, is the thing that makes them come every day to the table, switch on their computer and engage with us in the way that they have been. The computer stuff, the technology, is just there as a vehicle for us to enable them to do their learning, really. So Ansford, if you don't know, is in a really rural location, thus the goats. We are right in the middle of nowhere. We've got awful internet connections for quite a lot of our families. So we're doing this in the face of what you would call great diversity, I guess, and difficulty. We use Google Chromebooks. The vast majority of our kids have them, but we didn't buy them for them. So their families buy them for them, and we give them to anyone who doesn't have them. So when we come back to school in September, we've got no IT infrastructure because all of our Chromebooks are out with our families. I'm not really sure what we're going to do about that, but you know what? It's better that they had them than we had them. We use Chromebooks, as I say. We use Google because it's free. So we use Google Classroom for everything in lockdown, but we were using it before for them to do their independent working as well. We've used Google Hangouts all the way through lockdown, and my staff have been amazing at really diligently chasing kids who don't come to Hangouts in the same way as they would chase them if they don't come to school. Because, you know, there are kids. We need to make sure that we keep track of them and that we know what's going on for them and that we're caring for them, regardless of whether they're in the building with us or whether they're sitting in their dining room. And that's been really important to us. The reason we were interested in technology is because it allows agency. It allows kids to do what they need to do when they need to do it, not be controlled by one conductor at the front of the classroom who's trying to marshal the learning of 30 kids. And it's always going to fail. There is no way a teacher can go at the pace that every individual child needs them to go at and be successful. There's no wonder we have a mental health crisis in our schools and our profession when we're trying to get people to manage that. So for us, the technology, even when we were in school, was about allowing kids to go at different speeds within the same room and access their learning differently. When you then take away the room and put them in lots of different rooms, you immediately transform their experience, because no longer are all of the other people in the room trying to do their own thing, getting in the way of that child being able to. And so I accept that there are things that being together does really, really well, physically being together. But there are lots of things that being physically together, in my opinion, gets in the way of. So there are lots of distractions that come with being together that don't happen when you are able to have your own space and get on with your learning. And as leaders, we only need to reflect on how much more we get done when we take those days to work at home and we don't have to deal with the things that are the cut and thrust of a normal day's work. So I'm not interested in technology. I'm interested in thinking differently about the way we use space and time, the way we allow children to find the way that they need to work, the flexibility that we could build in to smash that factory model and move to a model that is much more in keeping with the way that our society and working life works. You know, if you read The 100-Year Life, the Linda Grant and Andrew Scott book, it talks about people having portfolio approaches to work. And yet we're using an education system that is based on a one career model. So we all do everything at the same time and we do it until we get to a certain age and then we stop. That's not how the world works anymore. It's likely that as adults, we'll have two careers going at the same time. So why do we insist on educating our children in school and then allowing them to go home and do the things they love? Why can't those two things mesh a little bit more so that they're a whole person in their education? Also, if you look at the work by Dr. Karen Edge on generational approaches to work, the millennials are trying to smash the way that we work, and yet we're educating children like they won't follow in their footsteps. And I don't understand that either. So for me, I think we should be thinking, and I appreciate some of you are probably thinking, why is she not talking to me about practical things I can do to start in September? I don't think we've got time to just talk about what we can do in September. I think we've got to open our eyes to the fact that we might be about to sleepwalk back to a model that we were all dissatisfied with just because it's the thing we know. I read the government guidance, which started with the sweeping generalisation that we all know that returning to school is vital for our children's education and for their well-being. I don't know that. I don't accept that. I don't think being back in school, learning in the way that they were, is vital for the well-being of a sizable amount of my children. I know that actually having a chance to think about what is right for them, giving them some sort of voice in that, of course, with the critical friend of their coach, and we coach all of our children at Ansford, but actually having some sort of agency is really important to your mental health. Being able to learn in a world that makes sense to you, rather than sitting in serried ranks, facing the front, wearing a uniform. Actually, we have a uniform, but the idea that everyone should start having a uniform because that would help is nonsense. You know, we've got to be a little bit more thoughtful as a profession, I think, about not just what we can go back to, but how it might be different. Now, I don't have wealth of research behind me telling me that this will work, because actually you only really get research about the things that are accepted already. And I think there is a need to stand on the edge of this and innovate a little bit and think about the things that we've seen in soft evidence over lockdown. You know, I get emails every single day from our parents and kids telling me how amazingly this is working. I've got a group of parents who are now getting in touch because I've asked them to talk to me about it, to say, the ideal for my child will be that they're able to have a blended approach. I don't want them to not be at home all of the time. I'd like them to have the best of both worlds. I also accept that for some kids, being together is the way they learn best. And so it's not about throwing out what we have for everyone. I'm calling for us to consider how we might be able to capture the best of both and then create a system that allows us to personalise in the way that we all say we want to, without being apologetic for it, really. So there's a quote I'll end with, and that is, in the rush to return to normal, use this time to consider which parts of normal are worth rushing back to. And I'll leave it there, I think.
No, brilliant. I mean, that we talked about this session being challenging paradigms, and that's done it, knocked it on the head, but it's done it with a humanity. It's done it with a reality, and it's done it with a sense of what we can do rather than can't. I mean, I've often asked the question, why do all students have to be in school at exactly the same time? And I think challenging those paradigms is probably the most important thing we can do. But at the heart of what Shonogh said, and what makes it particularly powerful, is it's about getting the culture right. For some reason, I almost bristle when people talk about sending computers to schools, and that will solve the digital divide problem. It won't. And many of them will end up not used or not used well. It's about getting the culture right, fundamentally, that makes it work. I liked your comment, Shonogh, about it's not a one size fits all, and it's about a blended approach to learning. But in fact, most kids in school get a one size fits all model to delivery. And that's the thing that we can do something about. Not every school will be able to change it tomorrow, but a useful thing to think about is, where might you be in 5 years if you start moving towards it now? If we don't, we'll be in exactly the same place in 5 years as we are now. But use this as an opportunity. If you can't change your whole school, think what you can do in your sphere of influence, your own proximity, the word I've taken from this morning. So thank you, Shonogh, for that. I think there's also something about trusting students in all of this.
There really is.
I mean, it really is. I mean, I think early in my career, I did two things. One is that I was in a school where kids did things for a week. And at the beginning of the week, they all disappeared. But what I found, and we trusted them, is they came back. So sometimes if you put kids on a long lead, they will take it to its limits, but then they will come back. And in a school I was responsible for, we put something on the timetable called Curriculum Plus, which was basically independent learning, and staff balked. But after a very short period of time in a difficult school, students came to really value that time to plan the work. And if we don't ever allow it and take some of those risks, it will never happen. So to me, part of this is about trusting more. But I love, Shonogh, the stuff you did about not turning up for your hangout was as serious as not turning for lesson. The teacher techniques that have evolved over millennia are important. I don't say anything about that, because what's been striking me, Shonogh, as you've spoken, is what makes the thing work. And it's some of the little things that are really powerful. And what do you think the most important things you do that make it work?
It's trusting people. It's assuming that people are out for good rather than assuming they're all villains who are trying to avoid things. It's also caring really deeply about people. And, you know, when I say it's important they come to their hangout, it's not important because we're going to punish them if they don't. It's because there must be a barrier that's meaning that they haven't come. And we need to know what that is. You know, it could be they're having a bad day. And if they're having a bad day, we need to know that because we need to be able to help them be hopeful about how it's going to be different. So it's trust and it's care. It's a belief in people, I guess, that people actually want to achieve, that they're motivated, that, you know, when they become demotivated, it's because their lights have gone off, because they're not engaged with something. It's not because they're in some way inherently bad or are trying to avoid being part of it. And so I guess it's inclusion, David. It's believing that people are worth something, and we are there to help them find what their true being is, what their identity is, and to put a fence around that identity so that they can cope and that they don't have to become ill. I'm not subscribing to the everyone's going to be ill after lockdown mentally. Some people are absolutely fine because they know who they are and they've ridden this through. And I think, you know, we've got to be careful of the catch up, and we've got to be mindful that everyone is not ill.
We're spelling that this morning. I think it's important. Yeah, respond where need is, but be positive about it and give kids hope. Okay, let's move on to our second input in this one. And just to prove we're not locked into any technological platform, Shonogh used Google. We're now going onto Apple and inviting in Les from Cornwall. Les, nice to welcome you to this morning's session. Les?
Yep, I'm here. I was just unmuting, struggling with technology like
Welcome,
everybody
Les.
else.
Just something about the British broadband, which we've regaled and I've suffered from. I live in a rural village now, but I'll tell you what, it's working pretty well, isn't it?
It's not doing bad, is it? I think one thing that I know in Penzance, because we have colleagues that come and stay, and they say that the broadband in Penzance is better than the broadband that they get in London. So we're really quite blessed with super fast in some of our areas. Anyway, it's great to be here. I just wanted to just say that was fantastic, Shonogh. I'll just say what she said, and I'll leave because she said it all really. So I'll tell a story, and I'll give you some practical bits because Shonogh was denying that she gave any practical things. But the practical things I'll talk about are to do with the bit of Apple technology, but I'll show you some bits and pieces as well. Before I start, though, I'll just see if my screen's going to share properly. One thing that I loved in the chat was Barrington saying that students' intuitive nature is not developed, and then you ask them to work. Then you're asked to work with their mental health, and all you do is bombard them with mental stuff. I think that's really a vital thing to cling on to, and I might talk about that in a minute or two. So if I'm trying to work out what I'm going to share with you. So the first thing I'm going to share with you is that one. No, it's not. It's that one. Can you see that? You couldn't really write that, could you? And you can't really write the pandemic. So I think when we were thrown into this, it was really a really interesting situation to be in. We are quite lucky in the things that we've done as a school. We've done some judgment things, but we've had quite a lot of luck. And one of the pieces of luck that we had, I mean, the judgment things. 10 years ago, we became an iPad 1-to-1 school. We were one of the first in the country. We're in the back end of nowhere down in Cornwall, but we see it as the beginning of the world. So we have 3 of the lowest super output areas in Europe within our wards. We see that as a problem, and we should be working hard to get those students out of those lowest super output areas, and we should be priming the economy and priming them to aspire to great things. So we work really, really hard on that, and for that reason, we do give all of our students an iPad. We don't ask any of them to bring their own device, and we make sure that everybody's got that facility to learning. We've been doing that for 10 years, and we've developed some systems that worked really well, but actually it hasn't been a focus because it hasn't needed to be a focus because we've still been able to teach students who come to school. But I would ask the question, are we able to teach all the students who come to school effectively, and have some of those students who come to school been looking out of the window and not really focusing or engaging in the things that we're doing? And are they the students who have been totally engaged while they've been in lockdown and they've been working from home? And I would argue that most of them have. So I'll just move on to, hopefully, no, that's not working. I'll do a new share. So just with the lockdown in mind, I don't think we should be going back down to lockdown, because I think we would a different profession, students were different people, and we should be just moving on. Acknowledge that, yeah, some people will have some issues, but then again, some people have always had some issues. There's always been a 70-30-10 rule in schools, really, where most of the students are okay most of the time. Some of the students aren't okay some of the time, and 10% of students will need some intensive support. So the way that we went straight into lockdown and cracked on with learning was we used this model. So we use Firefly as our learning platform, and we use Seesaw to submit review and feedback for students' work. Now, I'm saying like this like it's always been the case, but 1 week before lockdown, this is where the luck thing comes in. 1 week before lockdown, we did staff training on a program called Seesaw. We'd found it from High Tech High. We had some interns from High Tech High. One of the curriculum changes that we've made over the past 6 years is that we've introduced a more connected curriculum. So we connect some subjects together, and we've worked with High Tech High on that. And the students from High Tech High use Seesaw, even the 16 and 17-year-olds. So we stole that from them and implemented it in school. And then we did staff training on it the week before we locked down. So the accelerated way in which we had to implement that change was massive. But because the staff had been on board with technology for such a long time, it was quite simple, really. And we all know how techie and how savvy students are. There was a little bit of training that they needed, and then they were on it. So much so that within the second week of lockdown, we had 5,000 pieces of work submitted through Seesaw, and 3,000 of those pieces of work were marked and sent back. So what we did then in the third week was we put all the parents onto Seesaw so that they could like and comment on the students' work. And we've never seen as much parental engagement in learning in our lives. And you know, it's been absolutely incredible. So other things that we've done, we developed a, what's on your screen now? Yeah, we developed a virtual staff room, and we developed virtual tutor rooms. These are just interactive PDFs. So we'd send these out to students every day. They'd have a briefing. There's a meme that the teacher puts up in front, talks about the briefing, invites them to look at the books. When you click on the books open and give you the blurb on the books. This is the staff room, so it's got the union notice boards and the latest research from the research school and things like that. So we started just playing around. The teachers were really, you know, getting into this idea that learning was all online, and what could we actually do with it? So we did quite a lot of new stuff. We also did a detox festival. So in normal times, this time of year, we have festivals going on throughout the country. In Penzance, we have Maisie Day. Last year, we did a physical detox festival, which was about detox of the earth. So it was an environmental festival. This year, we moved it online, and we carried it on online. So we've been trying to keep things moving along nicely online, so that students still feel like they're part of the school community. It's been very difficult, but it's been very, very doable, and people have worked really hard to make it successful. The other thing that we've done is the transition was an issue, as we all know. We've all done different things for transition. So we wrote a new website for students and for parents, and this website shows them everything that they need. If you haven't, I'm sure some of you have, if you haven't already, then the campus tour, a 3D tour of your school is something that we'd done prior to lockdown. And again, that's more luck than judgment, but you go on a 3D tour of the school and it takes you to the whole school. So for year 6 students who are coming to the school, they can navigate, they can go through, it's like a computer game, and they can find loads of different pieces of information that then links through to PDFs and things like that. It's not that difficult to do. The interactive PDF was developed by our head of modern foreign languages. We did pay somebody a small amount to do the 360 photographs that we then linked together as a school. So it has changed the way in which we work. I'm going to stop sharing now, I think. Oh no, I'll tell you a little bit about the podcasts, because we've got a very active music community. I won't call it a music department, because it's not. It's a music community. So we've got a record label. We've got a record label that's got thousands of downloads from all across the world, and we've been doing podcasts. And we've got specialist lockdown podcasts. It's called Cube Records, because that's a building that students have developed. So the reason I'm telling you all this really is because we had some things in place prior to lockdown, luckily, that helped us with our lockdown experience. And that's why we look like we're really good at IT, because we've done quite a lot of stuff and had quite a lot of fun with IT. But the most significant thing for me was that when we moved in, well, I've spent my whole career trying to develop students as independent learners and develop this idea of student agency, so they will take control of their own learning. And so for me, the first week of lockdown, getting 5,000 pieces of work submitted by students because they were attending school, even though they'd just left school, was absolutely incredible. And it just, the light bulb went on. We've got independent learners, we've got student agency. Now let's move on to the next level. And we found that 92% of students on average throughout lockdown have attended school. That's incredible. And I'm really quite proud of that. We do the telephone thing where we ring them to find out why they're not attending lessons. We do the live lessons 4 times a day where we do live inputs from teachers. They chat to teachers on Seesaw. Teachers record their feedback. We do online Teams, social circles for students in Microsoft Teams, so we're not just Apple. We're a Google school as well, so we're I suppose vampires for technology. We'll take as much as we can, and we'll absolutely devour it. We did identify that connection was the key, making sure that we're staying connected with every single one of our students in every way that we possibly could. So all the way through from the teacher making connections to the new head of year 7 making connections with all of the year 7 parents and students. We've had thank yous from parents because we check in with parents to check that they're okay and they're coping with home learning. And like I said, student engagement's been fabulous. Last week we had a virtual sports day. The number 2 challenge was how many keepy uppies could you do with a toilet roll? So we have a little bit of fun in there as well. That was a good laugh. So when we go back, we're not going to be removing this. You know, I'm not calling it a new normal. I'm calling it a new way of schooling. You know, we're in a new world. There's something, we've just accelerated technology by 10 years in about 3 months. And it's been absolutely incredible to see. So we won't be removing live lessons. We'll be streaming them to those students who can't get in because they're at home or shielding, or because we're in a rural environment as well. We've got farms that are trying to stay afloat. So we will be having virtual staff meetings because we're part-time staff. So we'll carry on with that. We've been doing that and having staff quizzes. And yesterday, in fact, I wrote to ministers to talk to them about the coding for attendance, for student attendance. And I would absolutely get behind everybody here to write to their local MPs to lobby Gavin Williamson about the coding of students who are learning remotely. Because I've been banging this drum for 4 years about students with mental health issues who can't get into school being streamed lessons into their homes so that they could then be marked as attending, and then it wouldn't hit your attendance and you wouldn't have to drag them kicking and screaming into school. But they've been having none of it. And I think this moment, if there's nothing else that comes out of this, this is a moment where we can develop a hybrid model of education that we really need in today's society.
Thank you, Les. That was absolutely brilliant again. And it's the positivity that flows through. I love the phrase that connection is the key. I mean, what's running through all of this, if you believe you can or can't, you're right, which is the old Henry Ford comment. To me, it comes back though to the culture thing about getting staff on board, and don't, if you're listening, think, well, how can we do that in my school? You can't necessarily do these things overnight. Both Shonogh and Les are schools that have been working on it in a small way for a period of time. And don't underestimate that. You'll still be where you might want to be in 5 years if you start, but there's a massive opportunity. The technology isn't a barrier. A few people are asking about that, and throwing technology at it. I'd rather build and get some kids doing more and build on it than try and get everybody. You know, you can target, you can respond in different ways to different students. There's ways at it if you believe in it. Final segment of this session, we go to Jonathan at Cornerstones. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hello, nice to see you. Thanks for having me here today. So I might just share my screen as well. Hopefully in a moment that's going to come through. Are you seeing that on yours, my shared screen? Excellent. So glad to be with you all today. So we are based in Devon. So I guess that's rural as well, isn't it? And we're on the edge of Exeter, and we've got 4 schools within the trust, and they are actually spread largely around Exeter, but we've got one on the north coast in Barnstable. And we came I want to talk a little bit about what we've been doing. We've been built in Microsoft Teams and Office, and so we're sort of founded primarily on a Windows Office 365 platform. So the idea of coming back and changing these paradigms, what the new normal, if there is a new normal, might look like, and this idea of blended online and offline curriculum I picked up in the brief, and what blended might really mean. And I think these were some of the key things, lessons learned when we went out. So we, like some of the others here, we've had some one-to-one devices, and we issued them and sent them all home to give children enough access to devices at home, and we signed them out. And they're Microsoft Surfaces, and they've been able to connect back into school. And so designing that right learning environment for me would be my first top tip, because there's lots of options out there we've been hearing about today, but actually getting the learning environment right for the child. And I think this blended learning has been seen quite simplistically at the moment, about having some children at home connecting in and some children in a bubble back in September, and that hybrid model of some at home, some at school, and joining together in a lesson. And it is that, but the way we're starting to think about this now is more blending the style of that curriculum and the style of that delivery and the size of the groups that you're delivering it to. So from one-to-one tutoring or mentoring through to a lesson maybe with 1,000 children in it. So starting to think about how you might bring things together in a different way. So my second thing would be, look at the structure of your school day. We have become one of the Department for Education's EdTech demonstrator schools, and we're actually a primary map, but I've been having an interesting conversation just this morning with a secondary school. You imagine a bubble. They're not allowed to mix these bubbles. You can have up to a year group with 240 children in it in September, and they're going to be sort of in their bubble in this first instance. And if you're blending your physical environment and you're thinking about that learning environment in the classroom, they were about to go and buy some laptops for their teachers. And so I was talking to them about, well, if you've got some children at home and children in your bubble, and you don't really want those bubbles to mix, there's a few just real practical things you're going to start thinking about, which is, are you going to take the children to the teachers? That's quite a classic model, isn't it? Move them on, walk around the corridors, arrive in the maths department, arrive in the science department. You're going to take your teachers to your children. And if they're going to arrive with their laptop and you've got a virtual learning environment and a physical learning environment, how are you going to blend those two together? So if you want to start looking at a whiteboard with your back to the children, where's the camera going to be for the children who are at home? So actually, if you can digital ink onto the surface and project that surface onto the screen behind you, but look at your children, you're also looking down your camera at the children who are at home. And if you're going to move teachers to where the children are and then project up onto the screen and virtually down, you're going to really start to rethink. It's about, as some are calling it, reimagining the education. So you've got to think quite carefully about the structure of a school day. When do you start? When do you finish? How are you going to get that breadth of curriculum and that depth of curriculum? It's no longer just about periods on the ring of a bell, moving on to the next lesson. My next top tip, as I've been working on this, has been make the technology work for you. I mean, we've just been hearing from Les, you know, they're hungry for whatever technology, and they're looking at how it might work in their setting for their children. And a lot of schools that I've started to work with, what they're looking for is a quick fix about a VLE or a learning platform. And in one sense, what that's been is, if I could get some pre-recorded, and then the government has funded Oak Academy, some pre-recorded lessons by a teacher done, and we've mapped that to a syllabus, to a curriculum plan, and then I could assign an activity for them to do, and then they submit it, and it maybe auto marks it, and then the grade book tells me whether they've done it or not and who hasn't done it, you could almost beg to question, where's the teacher in it all? What I'm learning on this is you've got to make this meet the needs of those pupils. And the bit that is massively important is the engagement. It's not just engagement in learning in this isolated, discrete, studious way. It's the engagement with their peers. It's the engagement with their teachers. That live interaction is really important. So lots of people have been questioning about live lessons. Now, we came out and got it a little bit wrong. We tried to live lesson absolutely everything with everybody in it all of the time. Never gave them any time to do any work. So really thinking about the structure of your day, the breadth of your curriculum, what should be pre-recorded, asynchronous, what should be live, synchronous, what could be live to 1,000 children, what could be live to maybe a small group intervention or one-on-one tutoring, maybe what should be not live, but flipped, go watch this in advance of coming to the lesson. So then within it all, as you've been hearing from the others, you've actually got to support massively your staff, your learners and your parents. Sounds obvious, but this sort of shifting way of working, there's many staff out there that feel ill prepared. They've never worked in this sort of way of having to teach down a camera. There's a style of talking down to a camera to no one. At this point in time, I'm not saying I'm any good at it, but I can see my fellow panelists who are politely looking vaguely interested, and I have no idea what you lot out there are doing. I'm just looking at my webcam talking, and there's no real interaction. I can't monitor the chat at the moment. You could all be nicely really rude about me, and I have no idea. I'm just wittering at you in the hope that someone is out in the ether listening to me. And if I've got children in front of me, we start to say, how can I get that engagement? And then people start to worry about behavior. What happens if they Zoom bomb or even Teams bomb? I'm sure there's an equivalent in Hangout bomb. But if you get the link and join a lesson you shouldn't be on, and then you start chatting about things you haven't been. And then, so what we want to do is default back to the way we've always done it. And I've been talking to lots of schools about, actually think about your physical classroom and how you would manage those situations, and apply the same principles back into your virtual classroom and start blending the two together. So if someone arrives in your lesson and they shouldn't be there, what would you do if they walked into your physical classroom and stood in the doorway effing and blinding? There's probably quite a few strategies you'd have. And if you start to think about your virtual environment like your physical environment, but you start to think differently. So then they say, how are you going to fund it? Where's the money coming from for all of these devices? How have you got what you've got? And I don't want to be too provocative here, but if you start thinking about, actually, I could have a lecture theatre, virtual lecture theatre, and I might have 240 kids from a year group into that virtual lecture theatre, and we might be able to do a great delivery. What are those staff doing whilst that one person is doing that keynote? If you think of university way of working now, there's a place for one-to-one tutoring. They're going to give us some money for that. There is a place for small mentoring groups, breakout groups. So if you can get a learning environment that's going to have some big delivery, but allows that small group chat, breakout sessions, and then you can bring them back into the main room. If you can make the technology work where actually you could be polling your students and getting an interactivity and a response, what you're creating is dynamic, engaging lessons, just like you did in your classroom. And in fact, you might be stood in your classroom still doing it. So this blended learning environment is a lot more about, do I like Google Hangouts, or am I a Zoom fan, or am I in the Teams environment? Actually, it's about getting the right devices, building a competence around working digitally. And I then think it's understanding the needs of the children. And clearly this is an assessment sort of convened conference. The complete digital solution, really understanding how the children are feeling, what their engagement is, how you're going to support them, and a big focus on working interactively, working collaboratively. Too many schools I'm working with at the moment are trying to get a solution for assigning work and managing work to almost these discrete objects somewhere in the ether that are just in isolation in their bedrooms. If they had a device, they're going to submit the work beautifully back on time. And I think it is time to, I think it is an American phrase at the moment, but reimagining education. Rethink the school day, rethink the timetable, rethink the group size, rethink that curriculum delivery. And I think, like the others have been saying, this is a wonderful opportunity. I'm not going to prattle on too long, but we've built it in Teams, and we're using this Teams environment for the leadership and the management of that collaboration between teachers. 4 schools on 4 different campuses in 4 different parts of Devon coming together to one school. I've treated 4 schools like one school, and we have delivered lessons, sometimes to 1,000 children, sometimes to 240 children, and sometimes to 1 child, and using Teams to get the teachers to plan and to collaborate together, and to get that threaded dialogue, those video calls, and actually blending that sometimes with a bit of safe social distancing, having some teachers in a breakout room physically with a full screen video conference kit, whilst we've got people virtually on other sites working together. That multi-authoring, those shared resources.
Jonathan, can I stop you there? That's been absolutely tremendous, and it follows a theme that's been running through the sessions. Thanks for all the comments people are coming. And I think what I wanted to ask you really is that it can feel very daunting, and this isn't something you can switch on overnight, although I'm encouraged by how across age groups, adults have been confidently, for example, using Zoom and Hangouts and Teams and the like, to communicate in ways they haven't before. And I think everybody has sort of agreed that engagement and communication is the key for this. But I mean, if you know, you've worked on it for a while, you're passionate about it, and each of the people who've spoken, if you're in a school that isn't so confident and isn't so passionate, what would your advice be to start with?
Yeah, so that's why I sort of put those top 6 tips. And when I've worked with schools that are right at the beginning of this journey of doing it, I've said, look, you need to look at some quick wins, because people want to get something as a plan in rapidly. And it has, as I think Les said, accelerated, 20 years into 3 months or whatever it is of our journey. And there are some definite easy quick wins to get that environment set up and that way of working and upskilling and training staff and thinking about those points. But one of the biggest things I've said is I think you need to get a clear vision and a clear strategy. Yeah. And we get focused on the product rather than the purpose. And it's therefore get together a drive team. And the first part of a drive team, often people do, is they go, who's keen on this? Who's my geek? And that's a positive phrase, being a geek, by the way. Who's my passionate person? And you get a little team together and they're going to drive it. The biggest thing on this is change management. And you've got to start with that strategic vision. And that's got to start with leadership, governance. You've got to get a strategy right, because otherwise what you're going to have is an investment that maybe in 3 months, 6 months will not deliver what people were hoping it's going to.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. And I'm pleased that you've highlighted the change management. One of the models that we, of people who've worked with us in Whole Ed is we've often said, get that advocacy group together, possibly include some people who aren't your confident geeks in it, because that's quite useful. Do something small, then take to scale. Because one of the things we've shared a lot with is think where you want to be in 3 years' time rather than where you want to be tomorrow. Because if you try to do everything at once, it tends to fall flat in its face. Les, you wanted to come in with a closing comment, then I know we're due a break.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the kids are doing it anyway. So the fact that we're not doing it in schools just means that we look like old people. So why not get the kids to teach you what to do and what their needs are? That's the way that we've done it all the way through.
As well. I mean, there's an Australian academic who's probably very old if he's still alive, is Hedley Bear, and he talked about the tyranny of the omni-capable teacher. I don't think we should force teachers who aren't naturally good at it to do it straight away. There's lots of other skills they can bring to the piece. And that's my other advice, is don't make everybody be omni-capable. just try to look at people who have these particular skills. Shonogh, just to close.
I think we've got to get more comfortable as teachers as not just being the only expert in the room. You know, the second you stop thinking like that and believe that there are really powerful brains in the room with you who just happen to be less old than you, you unlock all of the discretionary effort and intellectual capital of their brains too. And I think that is the enemy, actually. Believing you're the only one who has to be the expert is the enemy of moving forward, really.
See yourself
And
as
also,
an enabler. See yourself as an enabler is my message.
but also be brave enough to screw it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can, but don't make the whole school do it at once. Anyway, on that note, we're going to break. We're going to have a shorter break this time because we're going to restart at 12:15. You're only about 55 minutes away from lunch, so I think we can live with a short comfort break this time. Can I thank again our three panelists, and the confidence and passion. Don't get over locked down with the lack of resource. Of course, it's an issue. Schools will never have enough money. But one of the challenges is what can you abandon and how can you redeploy existing resource? And it's not fundamentally about the technology, because actually where there's a will, there's a way, and you can target it at those kids who don't have relatively easily. And it doesn't have to be everyone at once. There's different ways of meeting kids' needs, and you know, take all of that into the mix. Lisa, I think we should abandon some of the things we've planned for next year, and you've got a model of a set of programs to run next year, because each one of the sessions today would actually give us an excellent working base to work with things over the year. That's my challenge to Hull Ed for this. We're going
David, we have an amazing network. We have a brilliant, amazing, fantastic network, and I can see that Alex is on and ready for the sort of next.
Oh, brilliant. Lisa's going to talk a bit more in a couple of minutes. We're going to be back in less than 10 minutes this time, and we've got an amazing end with a program that within Hull Ed we're so proud of, and someone who's a great inspiration. There's 330 of us still with this program. I hope you're getting some interaction back from the panelists. I know it's hard. And the other thing I say in the short break, to identify your key takeaways, 1, 2 or 3 from the morning. You can do anything but not everything, and we'll be back in less than 10 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, Alex. Yeah, we're still on and live, but thank you very much, Shonogh and Les and Jonathan, Alex. If there is any time at the end, then Jonathan has 1 or 2 questions to pose, but obviously I know that you've got the sort of keynote to end, so I'm just going to leave you for that part of the break here, and then I'll be back in a few moments.
Yeah, hi, Alex.
Hello.